Hello, welcome back to a brand new episode of Make Thrift Buy, and I am so happy to be sitting right here making a new video again because I've been really sick for the past month thanks to my chronic illness, and it's just been so good for the past few days to have a bit more energy to sew again. I don't know how long this is gonna last, hopefully I'm on the mend, but I'm back for this video at least. And I just want to thank all of the people who've been giving me love and support on Instagram. It's really helped me get through some tough days. Anyway, on to the project for today. Oh yeah, and just in case you're new here, Make Thrift Buy is a series where you guys send in clothes that you found online from chain stores and wholesalers and expensive designers, and then I try and recreate them and show you all how to do it in the process. Now, Jaylene Grace and Chloe Underwood wanted me to try and recreate this ringer style t-shirt with an alien patch on it from Brandy Melville, which now appears to be gone forever from their website and copied throughout the cheap fast fashion world. But never fear, because today we're going to try and make this for ourselves. So let's go. First, I'm going to show you how to make a t-shirt from scratch. But if you just want to learn how to make a patch, then skip forward through the video to part 2. Okay, so first I grabbed myself a top that I like the fit and style of. And you guys know me, I love my crop tops. So to make the t-shirt, first I laid down some stretchy grey jersey, folded over like this, with the stretch running in this direction. Next, I grabbed the t-shirt that I'm going to copy, and I folded it in half so that the front neckline was on the outside, and then I matched up the folded edge of the shirt with the folded edge of the fabric. Now, it doesn't matter if the sleeve is running off the edge of the fabric here because I wasn't tracing around that part yet. First, I was just going to be tracing around this bodice section. I started out trying to trace around the shirt with some chalk, but that didn't work out so well because I couldn't see the chalk lines on the grey fabric. So I switched to a permanent marker. Now, this isn't the best idea for tracing onto fabric because you can't exactly rub out a permanent marker's lines if you make a mistake, so just be careful if you also go down this route. So I traced around the bottom of the shirt, making the line straight because it was curved for some reason, and added a little bit for hemming allowance. I also traced down the side from the armhole and the shoulder, which is from the neckline to where the sleeve begins, which gave me these 3 lines. Now I just needed to connect these lines with a neckline and an armhole line. This is a little bit trickier to trace. To trace out the front neckline, I put my finger on top of the neckline, folded the fabric back to where my finger is, and then I made a mark with my pen. I did this at both edges of the neckline first, and then I worked my way in. And then when I had a few marks like this, I basically just connected the dots and joined this curve up. And there we go, there's the neckline. Then I did the exact same thing for the armhole curve, putting my finger on top of the sleeve seam and making little marks with my pen, and then joining these marks up. And there we have it, the front bodice piece for the t-shirt. Then I simply had to cut this out, cutting through both layers of fabric, which unfolded looks like this. Then I did the exact same thing to copy the back of the t-shirt, except that I folded it the other way so that the back neckline is on the outside. And I traced out the back neckline instead. So these are my front and back pieces. Now I needed to make sleeves. To copy the sleeves of my original t-shirt, I folded the fabric over once, with the stretch running in this direction, and I placed the top of the sleeve down onto the fold like this. Next, making sure that the sleeve was laying totally flat on the fabric, I traced around the sleeve like this. Similar to tracing around the shirt, the bottom and the sides of the sleeve are easy to trace around. And I also added a small seam allowance at the bottom of the sleeve. Then, to trace around the more difficult armhole seam, I again used this method where I placed a finger on top of the seam that joins the sleeve, folded back the t-shirt, made small marks with my pen, and then joined these marks up into a nice curve. So, this is my sleeve, which I then cut out and I copied directly onto some more fabric in order to give me 2 sleeves. And now it's time to sew everything together. First, I placed the front and the back pieces together, and I sewed them together at the shoulders like this. Then I lay the shirt out with the right sides facing up, and I'm going to attach one of the sleeves. Okay, now watch carefully because this is a little bit confusing. I put the sleeve on top of the shirt with the middle of the sleeve matched up with the shoulder seam. Now I need to sew these 2 pieces together, but as you can see, the curve of the armhole and the curve of the sleeve go in 2 very different directions. But because I am working with very stretchy fabric, I can use pins to solve this. So first I put a pin in the middle, matching up the middle of the sleeve to the shoulder seam. Then I pin the sleeve on all the way down one side only. It's easiest to do one side of each sleeve at a time because otherwise things will get very bunched up. So with half the sleeve pinned on, I sewed it onto the bodice like this, using a zigzag stitch. And once that side was sewn on, I pinned the other half of the sleeve to the bodice and sewed it on in the same way. I repeated this for the other sleeve, and now I had something resembling a t-shirt. Next, with the fabrics facing right sides together, I'm going to sew the arms and the sides together like this. Things will work out best if you first sew from the underarm to the end of the sleeve, and then from the underarm down the side of the shirt. Now I have a t-shirt with raw edges. And I'm going to finish it off by adding the contrasting neckline and armhole bindings. So to figure out how much material I would need for the neckline binding, I measured the circumference of the neck hole, which came out at 24 inches. I then took 4 inches off this measurement. Next, I cut out a strip of black jersey fabric, which is what I'm going to be using for my contrasting binding. This strip is 20 inches long. I was able to take away 4 inches from the neck hole measurement because this fabric was extremely stretchy, but you will have to adjust this depending on the stretch of your fabrics. A good test to make sure that you've cut a long enough strip of fabric is to fold this strip in half, place it on the front of your neckline, and with your fingers holding it in place, stretching the fabric and kind of walking it along the neckline like this. Next, with this strip folded in half, right sides together, I sewed down the edges. Then, I turned it the right way around, folded it in half lengthways. Then, I quartered it with pins. I did the same thing with the neckline, quartering it with pins, so 2 pins at each of the shoulder seams and 1 in the center back and 1 in the center front. Now I'm going to sew these 2 together. To do this, I placed the neck binding onto the machine first, with the raw edges facing this way. The shirt goes on next, and the binding then goes on top of the neckline with the raw edges matching up. And at the same time, I also matched up 2 of the pins. Removing these pins so I don't sew over them, I'm going to then sew the 2 pieces together, stretching the binding so that the next set of pins match up. I'm sewing the 2 together with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm also using a straight stitch to sew the neckline on because next I am going to overlock or serge the stitches. But if you don't have an overlocker, then you should be using a zigzag stitch at this point. So with the neck binding sewn on and flipped around the right way, it looks like this. And I'm also going to give everything a good iron to ensure that it lays flat. Now I'm going to make contrasting bindings for the sleeves, and I'm going to use a very similar method. So I cut out a strip of black fabric that's shorter than the armhole by about 2 inches. So with this strip folded over in 2, it looks like this. I then sew the strip into a loop by stitching down here, cutting off the excess fabric, turning it around so that the seam is on the inside, folding this in half lengthways, and then placing it over the top of the armhole, with the raw edges of both fabrics matching up. And then I sew it on all the way around the armhole like this. Now, I'm not bothering with any pins this time, I'm just stretching the black binding fabric slightly as I sew, but if you want to be a bit more accurate, then you should quarter everything with pins, just like you did for the neckline. Then, to hem the bottom of the shirt, I folded the raw edge up inside the shirt about 1 inch, pinned everything in place, and then I went over the top of the fabric with my twin needle, and I also used my walking foot. Hemming stretch fabrics can be difficult, but I find that this combination with the walking foot and the twin needle stops the fabric from ruffling. If you don't have these attachments, then you can always place a piece of paper underneath while you sew and zigzag stitch your way along the hem, tearing off the paper when you're done. And that's how I make a t-shirt. And now I can move on to part 2. So I've never made a patch before, and I also don't really have any proper patch making materials on me, so I'm gonna be honest, I'm kind of making this up as I go along. I grabbed myself this scrap piece of plain white cotton, which I pre-ironed to make it nice and flat. And then I drew an alien's face onto it with pencil, using the original t-shirt image to help guide me. I figured that I needed something to stabilize the patch, so I grabbed some interfacing that I already owned, and I cut out a small square of this, and then I ironed it onto the back of the alien drawing. Next, with a very narrow zigzag stitch, I went carefully around the outsides of the alien's head, following the pencil line that I'd drawn as closely as possible. And I ended up with this. In order to stop the patch from fraying when I eventually cut it, I'm going to add fabric glue all around the edges. So I brushed fabric glue on in a thin layer, both around the edges of the stitches and also a little bit on top of the stitches, just in case I accidentally cut through any later to stop them unraveling. Next, I put the fabric into an embroidery hoop, and I used an embroidery needle and thread and a satin stitch to fill in the eyes. I've talked about how to make a satin stitch in many other videos, which I'll link in the description, but really quickly, you do a satin stitch by going up at one edge of your shape, then bringing your needle down at the other edge of the shape, and then pulling the thread through. Then you simply push your needle up right next to the spot where your needle just went down, bring your needle over to the other side of the shape, and back down again. And repeat this until your shape is filled in with these long stitches. And always make sure when you're done to flip it over to the back and tie a couple of knots to stop the threads from coming loose. So once I'd embroidered both the eyes, I grabbed these iron-on patches, which you should be able to find at most craft stores. I roughly cut out the alien's face, and then I sewed the alien onto the iron-on patch like this. Basically, I just used a straight stitch to go over the top of the already existing zigzag stitch. Then, using some sharp fabric scissors, I cut out the alien's face by going as close to the zigzag stitches as possible. And the fabric shouldn't fray now because of all the fabric glue that I used earlier, which by the way, I allowed to dry before cutting this out. So, here's my patch, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. Now, in order to attach this to the shirt, all I'm going to have to do is to iron it on, because the back of this patch has this heat-activated glue. So I laid the patch down on the appropriate spot on the shirt, covered it with some cotton to protect it, and then following the instructions on the iron-on patch, I held my iron down on top of it for 20 seconds. And now I'm finally done. So after all of that, how did the shirt turn out? How did I go? So my conclusion is, I love how this turned out. And this was a project that had surprisingly few hiccups for a project of mine. But if you didn't want to make an entire t-shirt from scratch, then you could always just get a t-shirt that you liked and make your own patch and then stick it on the front. You can really make this project as easy or as difficult as you want to. And I really want to make a bunch of other patches now and put them on cute, different colored ringer style t-shirts. What kind of simple embroidered patches could I make? If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for sharing, liking, supporting my videos, all of that. The kind words you leave on Instagram and in the comments. Anyway, I'll see you all in my next video. Bye! Thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon who helped to make this video possible. To become my Patreon supporter, go to patreon.com/AnnikaVictoria.